In my last video, which I'll put a card here and a link in the description for, I went over the unboxing and review of these lights. So in this video, it'll be the install only. I'll link these lights in the description in case you want to check them out, and let's get right into the install. I'll start off by saying I'm not an electrician or even a handyman, just a homeowner. So if you're installing lights yourself, do not take this video as expert instructions. With that said, the first thing I do before working on anything electrical in my house is find the breaker it's on and turn it off. Sometimes you have to try a few different breakers before you actually get the right one, and doing this can be kind of a pain because you have to reset any clocks that were on a breaker you switched off. When I do this, once I find the switch is on, I always make note in my panel for future reference. It may be pretty obvious now that the porch light is on the lights breaker, but you'd be surprised what I've found in the past. Do not trust a note on the breaker panel and assume the power is off to any device you're working on. Always test and retest to be sure. For testing, these non-contact electrical sensors are handy. You push the button and if it's got electricity in it, it will beep, but they do run on batteries, so you could easily get a false reading if your battery was dead when testing the wire. In other words, you would try to test it, it wouldn't beep, you would think it's not live, but it's because your battery's dead. But that's why I always find a couple live wires like I just did and test them before I actually use them. The experts will say always use a voltage meter, never use these things, and they're probably right. These are the lights I'll be removing. They worked great for about 3.5 years before they went out. Most of the time I accidentally left them on 24/7, so honestly 3.5 years is a good run in my opinion. I ended up getting a new version of these exact ones, which takes it from 60 watt to 80 watts per light. The 60 watts were extremely bright, so I'm interested to see how bright these 80s are. As you can tell, I use this non-contact sensor a lot, and I can't wait to see the comments down below. But now I got to remove these lights, and I first need to get into the box and unwire the lights. And that is the point where you'd really want to have a voltage meter. That would be the correct way to make sure there's no voltage going to these things, not using the contact sensor. It would be right here where you'd want to use a voltage meter to see if any current was picked up. Even though I am relying on the non-contact sensor, I always treat the wires as though they're live and am very careful. Now that the wiring is undone, the pressure is off, and I can remove these lights without the stress of getting electrocuted. I'm now looking to see how to get to the screw that's fastening the lights to the deck, and it appears I'll need to remove the light from its bracket in order to get to it. The problem, if we go here like this one, our short wire is not going to make it except for right behind this pole pretty much. So up here barely wraps around the pole. The problem I just realized is that the power wire that comes with the new lights is much shorter than the originals, which means I'll have to change my wiring setup. I was hoping for a plug and play and be done with this and have functioning lights, but I kind of need to tidy up the wiring situation anyway, so maybe it's for the best. And now we move on to the install. Since I've got to change the wiring up, I've decided to use Conduit this time. This should protect the wires from the elements as well as any screws coming down from above. This is my first time working with any kind of conduit, so it took a while to figure out what all I needed and how to make the pieces link up. In the middle of the whole process, I realized I probably should have went with some flexible conduit. It would have made the process a lot easier. In order to install the new lights in the same spot as the old lights, I need to install a conduit box here, then figure out how to get the rest of the wiring to this box. This is about where the old light was situated, and with the new conduit box I can easily get the wire in there, so that's good. We can install that there, and this is where the old light on the other side was located, and the wire goes in there. So we are ready to install these lights. And one thing I do like about the new lights is the way the bracket is on. You can easily screw in the screw without having to remove the light from the bracket. Alright, this is what we have so far, and in case you're hearing different birds singing, yes, I had to split this entire project up over multiple days. I just don't have the patience as most handymen, and I break these types of jobs up over multiple days. But here, what we're doing is we're trying to get an end cap so we can get the wire in there to make it a little more, or to make this conduit box just a little bit more watertight. What I'll do is I'll cut a hole in this and then feed the wire through it and then caulk it from the other side to make sure no water can get in.
It's not straight at all.
The end caps I have will not attach directly to the conduit box, so I had to cut a couple small pieces of conduit to go into the box so that the cap could then have something to attach to.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It's perfect. We'll just caulk that right there.
I was going to use wire nuts to connect these wires, but I just remembered I had a brand new bag of Wagos that I want to try out. This is the first time I've ever used these Wagos, and I've had them sitting around for a while, but I did run a few tests, and the hold strength was amazing. One of my biggest fears when using wire nuts is that they're barely connected, and then when I go to cram them back in the box, some of the wires pop out. You have to make sure your wires are around the same length and exposing the right amount of wire. You don't want too much exposed wire in there. It's going to be touching everything. Could cause a short. But once you do that and snap the lock into place, they aren't going anywhere. The only issue that I see here is that the box is so small and these Wagos are a little bit bigger than wire nuts. It's a little bit hard to get in, but I made it happen. Now that I have the lights wired up to their conduit box, I want to go ahead and get the wire here connected to the live wire so I can see if everything works before I get too much further into it. And for the moment of truth, let's see if they're working. Alright, jackpot. Man, they look good. And this here's to show you that the non-contact sensor does work. I finally got to break out the Harbor Freight heat gun as I needed to bend this conduit. The way I achieved that was I drove a screw in the end of the conduit, attached the bungee cord to the screw, then the other end to my garage door guide or bracket. This created a small amount of resistance on it until the plastic weakened from the heat and started to bend. Worked like a charm. Alright, with this I'm pleasantly surprised and excited on how well this bend turned out. Not bad for a first time working with conduit. Starting out, I plan on dry fitting all the conduit in boxes. It fits so tight I don't think we really have to worry about water, so I may try to skip out on adding glue. I don't know, we'll see. This is 1/2 inch conduit, and I had some old 3/4 inch conduit clamps sitting around that needed to be used. It's not a tight fit, but it does the job of keeping it in place while I'm moving on to the next leg. One thing I didn't realize that would be difficult was removing wire staples. I nicked a wire here, but I'll end up cutting that portion off. But if you have any tips or tricks on how to remove staples without damaging the wire, let me know down below. I ended up using needle noses on these last couple ones down here. Seemed to work a little bit better, but it wasn't perfect. I wish I wouldn't have cut the wire here. Since I'm putting it in the conduit, it does have a little bit further to travel than just the bare wire, which will end up biting me in the butt in the upcoming clips. I just show a few clips of the wiring process. Just know for a novice it takes an unreasonable amount of time to cut sheathing, strip wires, and work these wagoos into the box. Every time I added a new piece, the whole setup would start moving around, so I'm going to pop a screw in here just to kind of keep it into place. I feel like this is so far from doing it the right way, but it worked and I didn't damage the wire, so it's a win. So you may be wondering why I wired everything up without putting that last stretch of conduit on. And the reason is, like I said before, I split this project up into multiple stages over multiple days. I wanted to get everything wired up so I could use the light in between each stage, so it did require a lot of wiring and unwiring. But thankfully, one of the advantages of the wagoos is that it's easy to do. It pops on and pops off. And here I get extremely lucky. The 90-degree conduit piece fit snugly into the hole in my house and was lined up directly with the hole in my joist. Now all I have to do is cut a short little piece to go from the 90 into a 90-degree conduit box on the other side. And I got lucky here too. The hole was just big enough for 1/2 inch conduit. Even without any glue or fasteners, that 90 coming out of the house into that 4-inch piece of 1/2 inch conduit is very sturdy. We may end up being able to dry fit this entire run and skip out on the glue. And here I'm putting in a 90-degree box on the other side. mainly because I couldn't find any other way to make a 90 with this rigid conduit, but it ends up coming in handy here in a few. Okay, we've got one straight run left to install and we're done. I've got exactly enough conduit to cut the length, so the pressure's on with this measurement and cut. Before I was able to enjoy the view of the finish line, I'm just realizing running the wire through the conduit has now made it too short. But thankfully, we have a conduit box downstream and we have just enough wire left to make it happen. Here I've cut my last stretch of conduit and I'm grabbing my last piece of wire that I have in my entire house. Thankfully, it is just enough hanging out each side to make it happen. It's almost like I planned it this way. Here, as I'm piecing it together, I nearly had a heart attack. At first glance, I thought I'd cut my last piece of conduit too short.
Oh,
But it ends up that the conduit on the side near the light does have some play in it, and with that play and backing it out a little of the box that I started on, I ended up having plenty. So disaster diverted.
okay. So,
So as I get to the home stretch, I was losing light in the day and I had to stop recording, but I did snap some photos at the major events. I had to angle the box in order to fit in the conduit and get it in there nice and tight. Strip the wires, connected the wagoos at both ends, hopefully for the last time. And then pushed everything into the box. And we're done. This is the final product. I don't think I want to add glue. I don't think water is going to be an issue. This is the final product. I love the way it looks, a lot better than the way it looks before, and more importantly, it is safer.